Tommaso Augusti and Matteo Mariotti were both Italian nationals studying marine biology in Queensland. Tommaso had been a student in Australia for nearly 3 years, and it was only natural for the 20-year-old Matteo to seek him out. Matteo's English wasn't all that good yet, but his friend Tommaso was helping him along very nicely, and it was a good thing that Matteo made a good friend from home so quickly, because almost as soon as he arrived in Australia, he heard news from back home that his beloved grandfather's health was declining. The final half of the year was a rough one for Matteo, studying in a strange land with only one friend and almost daily updates of how his grandfather was becoming worse and worse by the day. Matteo was crushed. He was planning on taking a flight home over the Christmas break to make the trip to see his grandfather one last time. But the patriarch of the family breathed his last just 2 weeks before Matteo could make it. Tommaso dragged his friend off campus as soon as classes ended and told him firmly that they were going to the beach. Tommaso wanted to keep Matteo from sinking into a deep despair behind a closed door all weekend. He thought that Matteo would do better if he was reminded of his grandfather in a more positive way. Matteo had developed his love of the ocean right from his grandfather's knee, after all. So good memories instead of dire sorrow were definitely in order. He'd already packed the car ahead of time with wetsuits and snorkeling gear. So they drove to the nearest beach outside of Queensland, talking about the time when Matteo first went looking for fish in the rock pools off the coast of Italy with his grandfather. By the time they arrived, Matteo was smiling again, and he knew that the best place to be right now for his dampened spirits was the water, searching for interesting specimens, just like he did as a boy when his grandfather stood over him laughing with that deep, booming voice that could travel for miles. They puttered around the shallows for a good hour, just enjoying the sunshine and the ability to jabber away in their native tongue, talking about the good old days and where to get an early dinner before heading back to hit the books together. The water was pulling back into low tide, exposing more rocky outcrops to explore. Matteo put on his goggles again and strapped a camera on an attachment to his wrist. Since he couldn't take any specimens back with him, he usually took footage of his finds for later study in front of his computer screen. But Tommaso had a sinking feeling that he couldn't explain, a sixth sense, if you will. He told Matteo that he thought that the water might be dangerous, not an ominous statement in Queensland's waters by any means. The place is notorious for shark attacks, but Matteo waved him off. There hadn't been any recent sightings, or else the beach would have been lined with little red warning flags. Besides, they weren't nearly the only ones in the pools. There were children with little nets catching fish amongst the gentle waves, too. Tommaso couldn't shake the bad feeling, so he contented himself with collecting their towels and other possessions, hoping to hurry Matteo up when he saw that Tommaso had already packed up for them. While Tommaso busied himself on the shore, it didn't take Matteo long to wander in deeper. He was standing in waist-deep water when he felt the tug at his calf. Confused, he looked down, but the water was so cloudy that he didn't even register that there was movement around his legs until the tug suddenly became a blinding, searing pain that radiated from his leg. And then he saw it, in a torrent of red, the gray body of a tiger shark, no less than 6 meters long. Matteo managed to utter a shocked cry before he was yanked into the water as the animal tried to drag him deeper into the ocean. Tommaso just so happened to look over to call his friend to come out when he saw Matteo rip under the surface with such swift speed that it could only mean one thing. He was in the jaws of the ocean's most feared predator. And indeed, beneath the wildly thrashing water, Matteo was putting up one hell of a fight. In the animal's jaws, he could feel the shark's teeth grinding against the bone. Matteo rammed his hands right into the shark's maw and began to pull it apart like Samson in the Bible. Matteo's fingers were being sliced apart, but he blocked out the pain. If he succumbed to the agony now, then he was dead for sure. Slowly, with his lungs burning for air, Matteo managed to spread the jaws off his calf. The moment he was free, he shot up to the surface, the ribbons of skin and shattered bone that used to be his leg trailing behind him as he went. Matteo broke the surface, gasping for air and screaming at the same time. Tommaso had already sprinted across the sand, and he was just about to enter the water himself. His moment of relief at seeing his friend emerge from the shallow pool was extinguished almost as soon as the relief came, for Matteo was ripped down once again. Matteo was struck by an amazing spate of luck that he surely needed in that moment. The shark, half blind by the deep red water, miscalculated, and instead of grabbing the other leg, it only managed to grab hold of Matteo's hard rubber flipper. It jammed sideways in its mouth, getting properly stuck between its jagged teeth. Matteo kicked out hard, and now bare foot connected sharply with the beast's nose, sending it reeling back. In the next moment, Tommaso was there, grabbing him by the arms and hauling him out to the sand. Matteo, screaming prayers and love for his family, was delirious from shock and loss of blood. He didn't remember any of the words that were pouring from his heart, but the camera strapped to his wrist caught it all. In that moment, where death was staring him in the face, he wanted those closest to him to know how much he loved them. Tommaso reached the beach, slung Matteo over his shoulder, and carried him to their belongings. There, he used a towel to create a tourniquet to stem the bleeding. And even though he was telling Matteo to breathe, that everything was all right, Tommaso didn't quite believe his own words. The leg was shattered. It didn't even look like a leg anymore, and the sheer amount of blood that was pouring from it seemed incomprehensible for a single human body to hold. Just as Matteo's prayers began to lose volume and he looked like he was nearing unconsciousness, the paramedics arrived. Tommaso could see by their expressions that the situation was as grim as he thought it was. Somewhere along the route to the hospital, Matteo did finally sink into oblivion, and thankfully so. The doctors and nurses who met them at the surgical station were aghast at the state of him. As the surgeon wheeled Matteo into the OR, he shouted over his shoulder that the boy's people needed to be contacted, since he probably wasn't going to make it. But somehow, Matteo pulled through. Even though doctors were forced to amputate his left leg below the knee and stitch up his right foot and hands thoroughly, with enough blood transfusions and more prayers streaming in from his relatives and Tommaso waiting at his bedside, Matteo woke to a missing leg and more pain than he'd ever experienced in his life. But at least, against all the odds, he was alive. And now, nearly a year later, and still more physiotherapy in store for the next few years, Matteo is sure that his grandfather nudged that shark just a little, causing it to grab the flipper instead. The video of Matteo's fight for dear life spread around the internet like wildfire, and within the day, a GoFundMe account was set up to pay for his flight back home and for the prosthetic leg that he'll be fitted with later in 2024. All along Queensland, the little red flags went up once again, and the beaches stood almost deserted until well after Christmas. The parents who'd been at the beach that day held their little ones a little more tightly. If it had been one of them, this wouldn't have been a report on a survivor, but an obituary instead. Michael Jackson was a crocodile. He lived in the Adelaide River in Australia and was named because of his distinctive coloration. His body was dark green and brown, but his head was white. He was half albino. He was known to locals in the area and was easy to spot from a boat or the riverbank.
Michael Jackson, white head, black body. And he's sleeping. See if we can get close to him, eh? You off, Michael? That's Michael Jackson, white head, black body. Now I'm getting the hell out of here because I don't know where he's going to come up.
He had done well to survive to adulthood. Many hatchlings with such markings don't survive long. They are easily predated as they lack the camouflage their darker-skinned contemporaries possess. But this crocodile had made it to adulthood, measuring 4.5 meters, more than 14 feet long, and weighing about 400 kilograms or 880 pounds. He was top of the food chain. He had worked his way up to reach the top. His battle-scarred body had been through a lot. He had a sizable chunk out of his side. Cuts and grazes adorned his armored skin. This was his territory. This was in his domain. He lived along the same stretch of river for several years.
Jackson. He's about 5.8 metres.
Saltwater crocodiles are opportunistic feeders and can grow up to 6 meters, almost 20 feet long, and live to be more than 70 years old. Their powerful jaws are capable of clamping shut at lightning speed and exerting enormous pressure. Researchers found that of all 23 living crocodilian species, saltwater crocodiles had the greatest bite force, measuring a massive 3,700 psi. In comparisons, humans bite down at 150 to 200 psi, and hyenas, lions, and tigers generate around 1,000 psi. On Monday, the 18th of August, 2014, a fisherman and his wife visited the river. There are several stretches along the river which are popular fishing spots, popular with humans and crocodiles alike. The man chose one of them alongside an old ferry track which led down into the water. Fishermen often fish from its banks for the highly sought-after sport fish, barramundi. Known for its hard-fighting nature and delicious white flesh, these fish draw people to the water's edge with the hope of catching one. On this particular day, the fisherman, who has never been named, cast his rod into the water. Again and again he cast the lure into the river, reeling it in slowly in the hope of catching something. His wife remained further up the bank, enjoying the fresh air and the great outdoors. After fishing for a short time, the man was slowly reeling the line back in when he felt his lure snag. The line went taut, and he tugged on the rod. Nothing happened. He re-angled his rod and pulled again. The lure was stuck. Likely it was caught on some weed or underwater branches. He could see where the line entered the water a few feet out. It wasn't far. He was reluctant to break the line and start again, so instead he put the rod down and stepped into the water. He held the fishing line in his hand, carefully following it down towards the water's surface. Unbeknown to him, he was being watched. He had been watched since he had set up his rod an hour or so before. Something lurked in the murky water. It was waiting for the opportune moment. There were no telltale signs, no bubbles escaping from beneath, or ripples emanating from any movement. The river was peaceful as it flowed gently past the banks where the 57-year-old fisherman was standing. But the river was known by locals as being dangerous. Croc-watching tours took advantage of the numerous crocodiles that lived in the river. Tourists clicked their cameras as the boats motored past motionless salties, sometimes only their eyes and snouts protruding from the water. But the real entertainment happens when tourists board jumping croc cruises. To see the impressive sight of an enormous crocodile launching itself out of the water just inches away must be an incredible sight. To capture these moments, tour operators dangle chunks of meat overboard on metal poles. The crocodiles follow the boats and leap out of the water, much to the delight of the paying customers. But this is only enticing crocodiles. It's teaching them that humans mean food, and that by following boats reaps rewards. It's no surprise that attacks have occurred in the past. People have been pulled into the water from their boats. Perhaps the most famous case was that of Ginger Meadows. She was a 23-year-old British tourist who was on a sightseeing tour of the Adelaide River with a group of other tourists in 1987 when the attack occurred. She was sitting near the front of the boat when a large crocodile suddenly lunged out of the water and grabbed her by the arm. The force of the attack caused her to fall into the water, and she was then dragged away by the crocodile. Despite the efforts of the tour guide and other passengers to rescue her, Meadows was unable to break free from the crocodile's grasp and was eventually dragged under the water and killed. The attack was witnessed by several other tourists, and it sparked widespread concern about the safety of visitors to the Adelaide River, where saltwater crocodiles are present. But this doesn't stop people from enjoying the outdoors and spending time on or near the river. As the fisherman waded into the water to retrieve his fishing line, he was suddenly seized by the albino crocodile. The speed and power of the animal were immense. He was caught completely off guard. He didn't have time to react. In one bite, the crocodile had firmly clamped its jaws around him. There was no escape. All he could do was let out a yell before being dragged underwater. Then he was gone. His wife hadn't seen the attack. She hadn't been watching him at the time, but she heard his cry. She turned just in time to see a tail thrashing in the water before it submerged. The commotion had lasted less than a few seconds, and then all was still. All that was left were ripples from where the man had been dragged underwater. His fishing rod was still left on the bank, still with the fishing line snagged underwater. It was a shocking incident. From enjoying such a peaceful and mundane activity one moment to vanishing the next. In a panic, his wife phoned Tony Blooms, who runs Adelaide River Queen's jumping crocodile cruises. He was nearby and rushed to search for her husband, but couldn't find any trace of him and called the emergency services to treat the woman who had gone into shock before driving her back home to Darwin. Police and wildlife officers joined in the search at 8:30 p.m. Gunshots were heard half an hour later, and they found the man's remains at 9:30 p.m. It was clear he had been taken by a croc, and, judging by the territory he was in, they knew just the croc responsible. They hunted down Michael Jackson, the semi-albino crocodile, and shot and killed him.
We shot and killed that crocodile, and we recovered the remains of a male person.
It was a tragedy for the man and his family to die doing what he loved in an otherwise peaceful setting. It was a truly terrible thing for his wife to have witnessed, and it was also a tragedy for the crocodile. He had been persecuted for doing what came naturally to him. He had ruled the river for years. His unique coloring made him a 1 in a million specimen, an icon of the river. The attack was the third fatal attack in the Australian Capital Territory that year. It could also have been the fourth, as a missing man, last seen near a river, has never been found. The incident sparked discussions about culling crocodiles, introducing hunting safaris, and renewing safety campaigns. Of course, the jumping croc tour operators claimed that their activities had nothing to do with the fatalities. They said that enticing the crocodiles close to people and feeding them meat wasn't to blame. These are prehistoric and opportunistic hunters. They have been around for millions of years, and they are highly skilled and highly able to take down large prey, including humans. And where our paths cross with theirs, it will almost always result in someone meeting their final affliction. Piedade Beach in Brazil's northeastern city of Greater Recife is known as a shark hotspot. Since 1992, there have been 62 shark attacks, of which 25 have been fatal. But the draw of the ocean is ever present with the white sandy beaches and calm blue waters. Lifeguards patrol the seas, scanning the water for any signs of distress, but even they cannot prevent a shark attack. On October 14, 2002, 36-year-old Luis Soares de Arruda headed to the beach with his 14-year-old son and 10-year-old daughter. Little did he know that it would be the last time the three of them took a dip together. There were others in the sea, but it was Luis who was about to be the target of an apex predator. A tiger shark was swimming parallel to the beach. Its dark shadow just below the surface went unnoticed. It glided along, seeking out prey. It could sense the vibrations from the beachgoers. It was curious and swam in for a closer look. The splashes and shouts from those playing in the sea could have been mistaken for an animal in distress, something that the shark may consider as food. Luis and his children swam to about 20 meters or 60 feet from the shore. They were enjoying the cool water. The air temperature was dropping as afternoon was drawing to a close, but the sun was still high in the sky. The shark had spotted the three of them. It now changed course and made a beeline for the young family. Luis was unaware of what swam below him, but there had already been 5 shark attacks in that area alone that year. Signs had been erected along the beaches to warn people of the dangers, and yet they still swam in the sea. Being so close to shore gave a false sense of security to so many. People often assume that wading in waist-high water means that they are less likely to be attacked, but sharks can drive themselves onto the sand in pursuit of prey. They frequent the shallows, as that is sometimes where shoals of fish swim. Luis was now swimming in chest-high water. He could still stand on the bottom and paused his swimming every now and then to talk and laugh with his kids. However, with a tiger shark prowling the coastal waters that day in October, nobody in the water was safe. After swimming for 10 minutes or so, the shark advanced towards Luis. He was in front of his 2 children, and suddenly there was a sharp tug on one of his legs. He let out a cry of alarm, and his 2 children froze. In front of them, they saw a large, dark gray dorsal fin. It was just a couple of feet away from their father, and when he started struggling in the water, the children realized that the shark had got him. It tugged him under the surface momentarily, but Luis fought back. He kicked with all his might, trying to shake the animal off him. He came back up briefly and desperately waved his arms above his head. Those on the beach stood still, shocked by what they were seeing. Luis's 2 children screamed as the water around their father turned red. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't help. For a few terrifying moments, they were frozen in fear, unable to move. They could see the fear in their father's eyes. There was a splash and a swirl in the water. A large gray hump emerged out of the water. It was the shark's back. The sun glistened off the skin before it dived back down, dragging Luis with it. His children made a mad dash for the shore. They dare not look back behind them for fear of what they might see. Was the shark coming for them now too? It had disappeared from sight. The terrifying thought that it might pop up next to them, or that they would feel a sharp tug on their leg, came into their heads, but mercifully, they made it to the beach. When they turned around to look for their father, there was no sign of him. It was as if nothing had happened. It had all been so quick. One moment, Luis was swimming with his children. The next, he was pulled under by an enormous shark. Although time seemed to stand still during the whole attack, and the memory of seeing their desperate father will play out in the minds of his children over and over again, the attack only lasted about 5 seconds. It was determined to be a predatory attack. The shark hadn't attacked out of a case of mistaken identity. This time the shark had seen potential prey and made a deliberate attempt to take it down. As the minutes ticked by, the hope that Luis had somehow survived the ordeal faded. Emergency crews were scrambled to the location. They took to the water, scouring the sea for any sign of the father. As the maritime group of the Pernambuco Fire Department motored their boat along the shoreline, they could see a thick blood stain in the water that stretched for 5 meters. It was clear that Luis had likely bled to death by now, or he had drowned. When evening drew in, all hope was lost for Luis. The following morning, the search continued, but now the fire department were looking for any remains of the victim. Near where the attack occurred, a chunk of body was found washed up on the beach. It was thought to be part of Luis's hip. It was a grotesque finding and hugely traumatic for his family. Only a month before, a 19-year-old student was attacked on the same beach. He was lucky enough to survive the ordeal, but his leg was amputated as a result. Following the dangerous and deadly attacks that seemed to plague that particular stretch of Brazil's coastline, the City Council of Recife proposed closing a 2-kilometer stretch of the beach. This was considered unnecessary by shark and marine experts. Netting off a large section of the water would likely move the problem on elsewhere. Instead, counselors suggested that a greater effort was made to educate people about sharks and the dangers of swimming in the area. They considered marking the particularly dangerous areas off with buoys so that people were aware exactly where the shark attack hotspot was, and they also deemed it necessary to purchase a boat armed with a harpoon that would patrol the waters and slay any sharks that came too close to shore. Luis's death was a terrible tragedy, but there have continued to be shark attacks along the 12.5-mile coastline of Greater Recife. More recently, in 2021, a man was mauled by a shark when he went to urinate in the sea. 51-year-old Marcelo Rocha Santos had been drinking with friends when he waded into the surf with a friend. The water came up to just below their waists as they relieved themselves. Moments later, a shark leapt from the water, severing Marcelo's hand and taking a bite out of his leg. He was pulled to the beach by his friend, but died at the scene. In 2023, terror reigned once more. On March 5th, a 14-year-old girl was attacked and lost her leg. Remarkably, the very next day, on March 6th, another teenage girl, Kaylaine Timoteo Freitas, was dragged from the water by lifeguards after being attacked by a shark. The shark severed her left arm. She was airlifted to hospital and survived the terrifying ordeal. Even as she was carried away in a stretcher, people remained in the sea. Lifeguards had the unenviable task of wading into the water to remove people. It is little wonder why that stretch of Brazil's coastline has earned it a top spot in the top 10 for most shark-infested beaches. Locals believe that the construction of the relatively new Soape port is to blame. During construction, water flow from 3 rivers into the sea was diverted. This blocked the typical routes taken by sharks, and now, to make the same journeys as before, the sharks need to swim closer to shore. With so many people enjoying the water, human-shark encounters at Piedade Beach are now considered common, with many more expected to meet their terrifying final affliction. Russell Harris was born and raised in the UK, but he had an adventurous spirit and loved traveling the world. When he had visited America, he had met the love of his life, Jennifer. The two of them later married and moved to Australia to allow Russell to pursue his line of work. He had secured a job as a technical services superintendent for Anglo-American mining group BHP Billiton. His place of work was Groote Eylandt, Australia's 4th largest island that lies approximately 30 miles off the coast of the Northern Territory. Although the island is mostly inhabited by local Aborigines, namely Warrnambool people, the island is home to one of the richest manganese reserves in the world. It provided exactly the kind of job Russell was looking for. Being able to live and work in a beautiful country with the climate and beaches of northern Australia was a dream come true. The island is a reserve for many different animals. 83 different bird species live there, and there are nesting sites for green and hawksbilled turtles. Despite the heavy mining on the west side of the island, Groote Eylandt is a wildlife haven and considered paradise by those who have been lucky enough to spend some time there. But there are hidden dangers. Although the beaches are covered in flowery white sand leading into the still turquoise water, sharks patrol the seas and saltwater crocodiles lurk in the shallows. In September 2005, Russell headed to the northeast of the island. He knew of a beach that was scenic and secluded. He and Jennifer were joined by another couple who Russell knew through work. The road was rough and arduous, but the journey was worth it. When they arrived at Picnic Beach, they weren't disappointed. The sand was gloriously fine, like walking on soft flour. The water was clear and a stunning shade of blue. The bay was picture perfect, and the group of 4 set down their belongings, laying out their towels and talking amongst themselves. The sun was high in the sky, and Russell and his friend were tempted by the water. They had brought their snorkeling gear. The sea was inviting, luring the young men to take a dip. The two girls decided to stay on the beach, sunning themselves on the towels and chatting away happily, whilst Russell and his friend headed to the water. They paddled in up to their waists before pulling their masks and snorkels on over their faces. As the water engulfed them, they dipped their heads beneath the surface and marveled at the underwater scenery in the crystal-clear sea. Brightly colored fish darted this way and that. Sea anemones clung to rocks, waving with the motion of the currents, and large wrasses swam near the seafloor. It was some of the best snorkeling the pair of them had experienced, but danger was heading their way. Unbeknown to the four friends, those entering the water around Groote Eylandt do so at their own risk. Not only do sharks frequent the shallows, but saltwater crocodiles inhabit the coastal waters. They can grow to enormous sizes and are more aggressive than their freshwater relatives. In Australia, salties are responsible for between 2 and 3 attacks every year. People are cautious of entering riverways and estuaries, but few think about crocodiles when they are swimming in the open ocean. The two men snorkeled near each other, only a few yards apart. Every now and again, they would point something out to the other and dive down to take a closer look. They weren't aware that a silent and deadly predator was moving closer. It was scouring the shallows for an easy meal and had detected the vibrations of the two men swimming from far away. It homed in. Under the water, the 15-foot giant reptile swam effortlessly through the sea. Its tail propelled it towards the pair as they continued to enjoy their snorkeling experience. Neither man looked behind him as they floated on the surface. If they had, they would have spotted the crocodile from several yards away, making a beeline for them. There was no way that it could hide in waters so clear. Instead, it relied on its speed and surprise attack from behind. When the crocodile was just feet from the two men, Russell's friend dived down to take a closer look at some fish near the sea bottom. And that's when the crocodile attacked. Russell suddenly felt a sharp tug on his waist and wheeled around. Expecting to see a shark, he was terrified to see the olive green and scaly skin of a saltwater crocodile. It tugged him underwater, and immediately Russell was in a fight for his life. He had been taken completely by surprise, and his friend, who was just feet away, was unaware of the battle going on above him. Under the surface of the idyllic cove, Russell was wrestling with a cold-blooded predator with millions of years of killer instinct locked into its ancestry. Considered to have the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom, the saltwater crocodile clamped its jaws down around Russell with 3,700 psi. He tried desperately to pry open its jaws, but there was no use. The crocodile was not letting go, and Russell could feel himself growing weak. The crocodile rolled the 37-year-old over and over, writhing its body in the water, disorienting Russell. He couldn't hold his breath anymore. He could see the shimmering surface of the sea feet above him just moments before he blacked out. Seconds later, Russell's friend resurfaced. He looked around for Russell and was surprised that he was nowhere to be seen. He was puzzled. Where had he gone? He ducked his head back into the water and pivoted around on the spot, searching below him in all directions for Russell, but there was no sign of him. The two had been together just moments before. He decided to swim back to the beach, assuming that Russell had already got out. He swam to the shallows and then stood up and waded out onto the soft sand. He pulled his mask and snorkel off, wiping his face with his hand. The two girls looked up at him and asked where Russell was. That's when it hit him. Something terrible had happened to their friend. Frantically, they scoured the small bay for any sign of Russell. His friend dashed back into the water to begin an underwater search, and they called emergency services minutes later. Russell's disappearance was a complete mystery. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of a struggle, no commotion in the water, and no pool of dark blood which would have suggested a shark attack. Maybe he had unexpectedly drowned and been carried by the currents. A search ensued. Whilst Aborigines and mine workers searched in boats, the police took to the air in a twin-engine aircraft. If Russell had got into difficulties with the currents, then it was a race against time to find him. The search went on all day and into the next. It wasn't until the day after he went missing that his body was found floating at the mouth of 8 Mile Creek, a river 1 mile from Picnic Beach. As police officers approached the body, a 15-foot crocodile swirled in the water nearby, defending its cache. It was clear from the injuries sustained to Russell that not only had he been badly mauled by the enormous croc, but he had put up a prolonged and brave fight against it. Sadly, he wasn't able to win the fight and had lost his life in the struggle. When news hit home back in the UK, his mother collapsed on the floor. She was taken to hospital and sedated. The news of her son's passing was too much to bear. At the time of her hospital admission, she wasn't aware that Russell had been attacked by a crocodile, only that he had gone missing in the sea and was presumed drowned. Russell's sister flew out to Darwin to identify the body. It seems Russell and his friends had made a careless mistake, but as news of the tragedy spread, it became clear that he, along with many others, had heard that Picnic Beach was a safe area to swim. He had known that saltwater crocodiles lived on the island, but had been assured that none swam near that area. One of his favorite hobbies had been snorkeling, and with the water being so inviting, he was always going to take a dip. Had he known that a large crocodile was swimming nearby, however, then obviously he wouldn't have entered the water on that fateful day. It was a tragic and terrifying final affliction. On Thursday, January 9th, 1958, 42-year-old farmer Derek Garth Prinsloo from Orange Free State was visiting Scottsburg with his family. He was about to be the 6th person to encounter a shark along the same stretch of South Africa's coastline in the past few weeks. What began as Black December at the end of 1957 was now spilling over into the new year. For tourists and locals alike, there seemed to be no end in sight. South Africa's tourism industry was taking a hit as people avoided its beaches or flocked to those protected by shark nets. At the time, Scottsburg was a small resort with a beautiful backdrop, fringed by woodland. The sandy beach was framed by jagged rocks at either end, where rock pools collected at low tide. A grassy bank led down to the sand just the other side of a low seawall. The beach sloped gently into the water. It was a popular spot for bathing. On this particular morning, at around 7:30 a.m., the water was turbid. Waste sugarcane debris flowed down the nearby river into the sea. Silt from the seafloor was kicked up by the powerful waves as they crashed towards the beach. There was a drizzle in the air, and a breeze picked up. Not many people braved the conditions that day. Only about 20 people splashed about in the chilly water. Derek paddled into the sea to a depth of just over half a meter. He was wearing his maroon swimsuit and stood momentarily looking out at the waves. His daughter and wife remained on the sand, whilst his 16-year-old son joined him in the shallows. The waves lapped at his legs. He commented how beautiful it was there and how much he enjoyed the evenness of the waves as they rolled in. They were predictable. There was something calming about looking out over the water and watching the ebb and flow of the tide. But what he didn't know was just how much danger he was in. The other swimmers in the water were further out, but Derek was happy to just paddle in the knee-high surf for now. A few minutes after Derek stepped foot into the sea, professional lifesaver, 20-year-old Peter Little, spotted a gray shape weaving its way through the early morning bathers. It passed several of them, including Derek's son, Jacques. Then, before he could sound the alarm, the shark struck. With no warning, it suddenly leapt from the water. Its jaws were open, displaying its razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes rolled back in its head in preparation for contact. It grabbed Derek's right side in its jaws. The force from the attack sent Derek flying through the air. His muscle was torn from his right buttock as the shark clamped down firmly. He landed with a heavy splash in the water. He was shocked and covered in blood, trying to get to his feet, scrabbling about on his back. But a split second later, the shark wheeled around and attacked him again. This time it came at him from the other side and bit into his left thigh. It thrashed its head from side to side, and the water turned red around Derek. He cried out as he felt the shark's teeth sink into him once more. The bite was so powerful that it nearly severed his left leg from his body. He knew he was in trouble. He knew he needed to get out of the water, but he couldn't free himself from the jaws. The speed, agility, and power of some of the ocean's top predators make sharks a deadly force. Some species frequent shallower waters, particularly at river mouths or in shallow lagoons near the shore. Their ability to adapt to both shallow and deep water makes them a formidable and resilient animal in the marine ecosystem. As opportunistic hunters, many species will consume a range of different prey. Tiger sharks, great whites, and bull sharks are responsible for most of the human-shark conflicts around the world, mostly because they hunt when people are most likely to be in the water. But tiger sharks are known to be naturally aggressive. Derek was just feet from the beach when he was struck by the shark. Lifesavers rushed towards him from their lookout post. The water was so shallow that the shark became almost beached as it continued its frenzied attack. Its belly dug into the soft sand and its tail whipped back and forth, kicking up the golden sand and turning the water into frothing foam. People who witnessed the attack ran from the water, but nobody was able to pull Derek to safety. Seconds later, he was once again released, his limbs torn to shreds in the brutal attack, but he couldn't get out of the way. Each time the shark released its grip, there wasn't enough time to get away before the shark came back for more. Terrifyingly, the shark came back a third time, biting him on the buttocks and right thigh and severing his femoral artery. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shark wriggled itself away from the shallows, its dark shadow disappearing beneath the waves as it headed out to sea. The water had been so shallow that it hadn't managed to drag its prey away into open water. It had deliberately swum past swimmers further out in the surf to take advantage of someone in the shallows. It was a surprise attack. Lifesavers who witnessed the incident identified the species as a 2-meter dusky shark. These sharks can grow over 3 meters or 10 feet in length. However, in the commotion of the attack, the shark's gray-brown back and lighter-colored underbelly could have been mistaken for a number of other species. Considering the conditions at the time and the way in which the shark attacked, some experts believe that it was a tiger shark. This species frequents turbid, debris-laden water and is known to attack in the shallows. It is also common in the area where Derek fell victim. Scottburg had the second highest number of tiger sharks caught by nets and drum lines along the KwaZulu-Natal coast. There were definitely tiger sharks in those waters. But the identification of the species responsible didn't stop there. Less than 2 weeks later, the Sharks Board retrieved the bodies of a dusky shark and 2 great whites in the shark nets deployed off nearby Amanzimtoti Beach. After investigation and dissection, something they always performed on sharks killed in the nets, the stomach of one of the great whites was examined. To their surprise, the Sharks Board found the remnants of what was thought to be a maroon bathing costume. The material was also speckled with what looked like blood. Chemical analysis of the stains on the swimsuit revealed that it was, indeed, human blood. Could this have been Derek's swimming costume devoured during the attack? As Derek lay in the shallows, bleeding profusely, lifesavers rushed to his aid. He was just 4.5 meters or 14 feet from the shore. He was tantalizingly close to dry land, where his wife and daughter had looked on in abject terror as the events unfolded. The lifesavers grabbed him under his arms and pulled him out of the water. When they lay him down on the sand, they tied a tourniquet around his thigh, but the blood loss was rapid and catastrophic. He was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed to a private car which sped to hospital. En route to Renishaw Hospital, just a few kilometers away, Derek lost consciousness and never woke up again. He was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. The attack had been so brutal that his injuries were not survivable. 3 days later, Derek's funeral was held in the Yenison district. It was attended by more than 1,000 people. The church was overflowing, and farmers from far and wide came to pay their respects to a much-loved man who was taken too soon. Following the tragic incident, the director of the Scottsburg Chamber of Commerce set up a fund to help Derek's widow. He also began a fund to pay for a secure structure built into the sea to protect bathers from the threats of sharks. The local government needed to do something to prevent these never-ending shark attacks. Otherwise, their tourism industry would be lost forever. Derek was the 7th victim of the now infamous Black December, and the 4th person to meet their terrifying final affliction. Middle Harbour is a beautiful natural waterway located on the north shore of Sydney Harbour, New South Wales, Australia. It is a large estuary that is fed by several tributaries, including Garrigal Creek, Middle Harbour Creek, and Roseville Creek. The area is surrounded by lush bushland and provides a tranquil setting for water-based activities such as swimming, boating, kayaking, and fishing. However, dangers lurk amidst the immaculate view of this place. Sharks are known to occasionally enter Middle Harbour, but their behavior in this location can vary depending on a number of factors, such as the species of shark, water temperature, and availability of prey. In general, these creatures pose a relatively low risk to humans, as the place is mostly enclosed by a body of water with limited access to the open ocean. However, on rare occasions, the infamous bull sharks enter Middle Harbour. These types of sharks are known to be particularly aggressive, and they have been responsible for a number of shark attacks on humans in other parts of the world. While bull sharks are not as commonly found in Middle Harbour as some other species of sharks, like the smaller Port Jackson sharks, their presence in the area does pose some risk to swimmers, surfers, and the like. But sharks are known to be attracted to areas where there is abundant prey, such as fish and other marine creatures, and they can sometimes be found in shallow water close to shore. Unfortunately for Zeta and her friends, they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Zeta woke up early on a warm morning on January 4th, feeling excited and full of anticipation. Today was the day she and her friends had been planning for weeks. A picnic at Egg Rock, Middle Harbour, one of the more scenic spots in Sydney, Australia. Zeta had always loved spending time in the great outdoors, and the idea of a picnic near the water was the perfect way to begin the year. In the kitchen, she prepared the ingredients necessary for the picnic and arranged everything neatly in a wicker basket. She set it aside, ready for the calm, relaxing day ahead. Unbeknownst to her, this day marked one of the most gruesome bull shark attacks in history. As Zeta arrived at the picnic spot, she was greeted by her friends' laughter and chatter. She smiled and waved. They boarded the motor launch that would take them to their picnic spot. It was a hot and hazy day, and the waters inshore were clear. The breeze was gentle and blew warm air that carried the scent of the sea and the nearby eucalyptus trees. Eventually arriving at the spot, Zeta and her friends spread out their picnic blankets near the shore. The group shared stories, laughing and chatting as they enjoyed the stunning views of Middle Harbour. As the day progressed, the group decided to explore the surrounding area. Zeta led the way as they walked around the rocky shore, taking in the beauty of the rugged coastline. They saw fish swimming in the clear water and other sea creatures. Zeta and her friends stopped to take a dip in the water, cooling off from the warm sun. They took turns jumping off the rocks and into the refreshing water. At around 3 p.m., two of Zeta's friends, Mr. and Mrs. Bowes, waded into the shallow water, while Zeta watched from a distance of 10 to 12 feet away in the deeper parts of the water. As the two splashed and bathed in waist-deep water, they noticed that Zeta was drifting farther away. They called out to her, warning her not to stray too far, as they had heard of bull sharks being spotted in the area before. Zeta nodded, feeling a sense of unease, but she shrugged it off, thinking that sharks would never come this close to shore. Still, she followed their advice and made her way back slowly. Unbeknownst to her, a 14-foot bull shark was encircling her in the chest-deep waters. Its movements were quick and menacing. It silently glided through the shallow water, its razor-sharp teeth and powerful jaws at the ready. It was sizing her up. It sensed the vibrations through the water, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The shark bided its time and took advantage of Zeta being turned away from the ocean. It closed in on her, cocking its head from side to side. The shark darted toward Zeta and opened its powerful jaws. And then it happened. Zeta felt a tug on her legs, forcing her to throw her hands up in the air. The pain made her blood run cold, and she screamed in terror. One of Zeta's friends, Mrs. Reeve, was on an elevated rock. As she saw the horror unfold, she screamed for her son-in-law, Frederick, who was on the motor launch a few feet away from Zeta. Frederick turned to see that Zeta was being attacked by a large bull shark. He knew he had to act fast to save her. Without hesitation, he quickly grabbed an oar from the motor launch and leaped into the water, determined to scare the shark away. As he swam toward the commotion, Frederick could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He raised the oar above his head and struck the water repeatedly with a resounding blow. However, this made no impression on the marauding shark. It was still attacking Zeta and began pulling her away into deeper waters. It was a terrible sign. Frederick's instincts kicked in. He leaped onto the motor launch and frantically started the engine. The boat roared to life. Grabbing the steering wheel and revving the engine, Frederick accelerated toward the shark, hoping to ram the beast in the head with the motor launch. Despite his best efforts, this plan failed as well. Frederick jumped to the side of the motor launch in a last desperate attempt to save Zeta. He grabbed her by the hair, pulling her with all his might. He won the tug of war, but all that was left of Zeta was her torso. The shark had gotten away with her lower body. The water had become red with Zeta's blood. There was no way she could survive this amount of blood loss. Frederick scanned the water and saw Zeta's legs in the creature's jaws as it disappeared into the depths. Zeta was limp, pale, and hanging on by a thread. Frederick was shocked to see such a gruesome sight. He pulled Zeta's limp body closer to the boat, but the damage was already done. Zeta's eyes were starting to close while she bled heavily. Frederick knew he had to get her to the hospital fast, but he also knew that it might be too late. He started the engine and accelerated toward the shore. The calm, relaxing day quickly turned into a nightmare. Frederick knew that time was of the essence, and every second that passed brought them closer to the edge. Eventually, they approached the shore, and Frederick was helped by their friends, carrying Zeta to the shore. They called for an ambulance, but even as the paramedics arrived and worked on her, Zeta was no longer responding. They pronounced her dead. Zeta's attack was only one of the 6 that occurred throughout the years. These recent shark attacks in Sydney all occurred in Middle Harbor. But sharks are a formidable and dangerous species of shark that pose a serious threat to people who enter their habitat. More importantly, they pose a serious threat because they're known to thrive in shallow waters, as exemplified in the case of Zeta Stedman, who was merely standing in chest-level depths. The next time you go swimming, make sure to be cautious. Even in the shallow waters, you may just end up meeting your terrifying final affliction.